Hey kids, howdy, and welcome once again to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. I'm here with producer Zoe, and we are talking about August 12th through the 18th.
And how's it looking?
It's actually a slim week. There's a lot happening in the Mercury retrograde cycle, which is good that we get to sort of focus on that because it's a bumpy AF Mercury retrograde cycle, that's for sure. And this week and next week are going to be pretty bumpy. So it's good that we can sort of talk that out and break it down. But it is a quiet week. Like, you know, the podcast comes out on Sunday night at midnight and covers Monday through Sunday. And that next Monday is like a big full moon and Jupiter squares hat. Like next week will be a juicier, longer episode than this week. This week it's a little slim. But we'll start out, as we always do, with an astrology question. They keep coming. Thank you for sending them in. I love answering questions on the pod. Dear Michael and Zoe, I recently had a conversation with a friend who described how the study of her natal chart combined with her mother's natal chart, termed a synastry chart, which she puts in parentheses, and yes, that's accurate, synastry, allowed her to better understand the dynamics of their relationship. She mentioned that she felt that the relationship of the position of the moons relative to each other was particularly helpful in her exploration. As both of my parents have passed, I intuit that this approach may be a potential path to some healing and a more full comprehension of them as people. Does this resonate with your experience? If so, are there specific planets, transits, or other considerations that might be more fruitful in exploring than others? With great appreciation for your life's work and kindest wishes, Lynn. I love this question for like a myriad of reasons, including the fact that, of course, I have done this with both of my parents' charts and received incredible insight and value in certain difficult dynamics that existed between us. So synastry is the word, S-Y-N-A-S-T-R-Y. Synastry is the word that reflects that we take two different birth charts and we examine the chemistry between them. It's kind of like the midpoints, right? If your sun is here at an Aries and your sun is, a few signs later, what's the midpoint between them? There's also a way to incorporate time and space into that, but now I'm getting a little advanced for like the purposes of our discussion here. Yes, synastry says you can take two charts, look at the friction between them, and then have a very accurate description of the chemistry, the sensation of both people, and if there's power and purpose to the connection, it will be in there for sure. So I love that Lynn is already being exposed to the idea of moons, because moon is the right place to go in some ways when you're talking about anything that has to do with mothers especially and family. Because in astrology at large, we often use the moon as a stand-in for home and mothers. Similarly, a lot of astrologers will use someone's Saturn placement to describe stuff about their fathers. I sometimes will look at Pluto for the same thing. So we start with this, that moon in astrology has a connection archetypally and energetically to our experience of home, mothers, and female friendships even. Of course, we have to figure out how to expand astrology and get it into the modern world where gender's not just a binary, but still we have moon as connecting to that sort of feminine family, home, mother space. So the idea that you might look at your moon and a parent's moon and how they relate is absolutely a wonderful way to start an exploration between how two people experienced each other In fact, I would say this about synastry in general. Most people in pop astrology are running around there thinking about sun sign compatibility. I only date Capricorns. And it's like, that's bad astrology on every level. Yes, how your sun sign and a partner's sun sign relates to each other will be felt in the relationship between you. But the moon, as an example, is a much more powerful arbiter of how two people are going to
Interesting.
experience each other, because the moon represents our unconscious connection, which is much, much, much bigger than our conscious awareness. Even though we think our conscious awareness is all that because it's all that we know, we also have to understand that what we experience in the room in any given moment is a greater function of what's happening unconsciously. And the moon gives you an archetype that describes that. And then two moon signs relating to each other, chart to chart, will kind of describe not what's consciously happening between two people in the room, but how their unconscious experience bumps up against each other. And I think that could yield a lot of results. Another thing to look at is Saturn. How does the Saturn placement in your parents' chart relate to your chart? And how does your Saturn placement relate to either one of your parents' charts? I'll share something personal here. My father's Venus was at 18 degrees of Aquarius. My Saturn is exactly at 18 degrees of Aquarius. So my father's inability to be loving and kind and generous from his heart towards his children, and me in particular, was a huge part of my Saturn life lesson challenge with love and unrequited love and wanting love from men who didn't return it, as sort of describing my early life. Right, and there it was when I learned astrology. It was like, wow, it almost transcended the personal. Like, it took away the personal sting of how difficult my father was when I looked at, oh, my dad was the perfect dad for me to sort of serve my karmic contract. And that gave me an ease of surrender to the difficulty of what it was to heal that relationship. And I didn't learn that till long after he had passed away, because he died when I was about 24. My mother's Venus was at 27 degrees of Virgo when I was born. My Mercury is 27 degrees of Virgo. This explains why my mother locked into me as her favorite, because if I spoke, it lit up her heart. So she took me hostage. And what happened was I developed such a longing and a need to get her attention with my voice, which was rewarded to the best ability for my mother to reward with her attention. My mother had such ADHD, she had no attention for anything. But she had what little attention she had for me and what I had to say, which you might think of as a lovely thing until you put into the crucible of traumatizing parental relationships. My mother took me hostage. I suppressed my emotional body deeply so that I could have a connection to this crazy woman who was raising me. And when I felt betrayed coming out to her at 16, it changed that enormously. And I had to spend the rest of my life fighting down the rage and working towards forgiving her. But that connection illuminated so much for me about why I had that connection with my mother and what was behind it energetically. And that helped me forgive her and forgive myself for the way that relationship was challenging. So back to Lynn. I love that you're working with the moons. Yes, go, but also incorporate Saturn in both their charts and your charts, and then look for anything that's like really strong, like a powerful conjunction in the way that I just described for my charts, or geometry between the two charts that's very exact. None of these loose orbs of influence, but like one point squaring another point and having it be like an exact 90 degree. Right? Significant geometry in that synastry might also illuminate challenging ways the two people connected. But I love that you were guided to start with the moon because, yes, much more valuable to understand the unconscious elements of any relationship is to see how the two moons relate.
Michael, do you do these readings and sessions? Like, I know people come to you to just ask about their chart in general and also the year ahead, but do couples come in and they say,
Yes.
can you
Oh,
line it up?
absolutely. Anytime that somebody has this. Yes, in fact, what happens mostly, it's not something that I ask of people. I just like, we can spend that 45 minutes. You're paying for my time. You're not actually paying for anything that I give you. My time is worth a lot because I've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours preparing to give a person a powerful 45-minute experience with degrees and life experience and mastery in astrology. So you're paying for my time. If you want to get together and talk about my puppy for 45 minutes, I'll do that. I'll sit on the floor and play with her on Zoom because you're paying for my time. So when someone wants a session and they've met somebody or they want to understand their relationship with their parents, they will usually offer that in their interaction with me, and I know about it in advance. But even if somebody said to me in a session, hey, I just met somebody, like it's no problem to whip up someone's chart and then do this synastry report that allows us to see how two people relate to each other in ways that is way beyond what the sun signs inform. So today's podcast episode is dedicated to Mercury and this wild ride retrograde process that we are in. Part of why that is for the episode is it's a quiet week. Now, next week, not so much. Next week starts with a banging full moon right on Monday, a sort of long-lasting square between Jupiter and Saturn that's been building for a while and will hit again in December. So I'll be talking about a lot of stuff in next week's episode that starts off the week as a banger. But this week's quiet. So there aren't any major sort of bumps to talk about in the way that I typically address, but Mercury is very, very active this week in his retrograde cycle. So let's do a little overview. And if you have been paying attention to the dates of this, get out your pencils. Unless you're driving, don't get out your pencils if you're driving. So back in July 17th is when the retrograde shadow started out. That Mercury got to 21 degrees of Leo, and between July 17th and August 5th, Mercury moved from 21 Leo to 4 degrees of Virgo. So this means that this retrograde is passing between both Leo and Virgo, and that counts when it comes to how we interpret the retrograde cycle. Any Mercury retrograde that sort of dovetails over two signs, I interpret in this way. The quality that each sign brings gets bled together in such a way that both can sort of go into a recipe for shift and change. Mercury in Leo will allow people to have a greater sort of trumpet to their voice, to speak up more, to be centering their voice, because Leo is about being at the center. Leo is ruled by the sun. Sun is the center of the solar system. So Mercury in Leo says, I have a voice. I know what to say. Listen to me. Listen to me. Listen to me. Virgo is a whole different atmosphere for Mercury. First of all, it's one of the signs that Mercury rules. It's also the precision sign of Mercury's rulership. Gemini is about the words, and Virgo is about how we put them together to create masterful communication. And Mercury is in the sign when he's in Virgo that is co-ruled by Chiron. So Mercury in Virgo is also capable of receiving healing to mental patterns that might inhibit you from having a more powerful, self-centered, in a good way, voice. So by Mercury traversing both mansions 3 times, that's like opening us up to have a little bit of creative self-expression bleed into the voice, while healing is also shifting patterns that inhibit creative expression in the voice. It's a lovely combo of signs when you think of the net result is we come out with some mental patterns healed and more willingness to speak up powerfully. So then on August 5th, Mercury turned around, and the retrograde is from August 5th to August 28th. And this week we are smack dab right in the middle of the backward passage. Now, We point out the dates of July 17th to August 5th for a reason, because everything that's bumpy that's coming up this month while Mercury is moving backwards very likely hinted itself to you back in late July in the first 5 days of this month. So go to your calendar, go to your journal, go to some record that you have, if you can remember anything. I can't remember anything from one day to the next these days, but my calendar is a good trigger for these things. And just note that if you're bumping up against things this month, there might be some, not only hints about that from last month, but there might be value in understanding the connection between stuff that rose up before and stuff that's rising up now. The transits that Mercury is making with other planets during all three portions of the cycle describe the sort of energetic experience of the cycle itself. And all of these transits happen 3 times. That's why we call them triple transits, because they happened once in that July section, once now while Mercury's backwards, and a third time when he's wrapping up between, late August and mid-September. Depending on what that geometry is like would lead me to be able to say, oh, this one's going to be easy, this one's going to be bumpy, and make no mistake about it, this one is motherfucking bumpy. Like, I had to throw in the big curse word there. I mean, it deserved that. Partially because it involves being in Virgo. Anytime Mercury's retrograde in one of his own signs, the communication is going to be doubly problematic. I remember when Mercury went retrograde in this cycle, I had to do stories on Instagram because the technical breakdowns those few days were so outrageous. It's like I went onto Instagram stories to say, I defy anybody to say astrology is not a thing. It was what was it? It's like Zoom broke down, PayPal broke down. I had one day where Lisa spent all day in the email box because nobody could do something on PayPal. And we had all of these resubscriptions for my daily astros, all the day Mercury turned around in Virgo. That alone will make this whole retrograde bumpier. But the transits themselves are also very challenging. This week features 3 of the most interesting of the triple transits for my money, making this week fascinating as the retrograde goes. So there's this pattern in astrology called a finger of God or a finger of fate. It's also called a yod, Y-O-D. And it's a long, narrow triangle that has to have 2 planets interacting in a 60-degree relationship, a sextile, on the blunt end. Picture a long, narrow triangle where the blunt end has 2 planets that are like the motor. And then the long, narrow triangle has a planet across the way, sort of hitting each of the sextiling planets in a 150-degree angle, and that creates this long, narrow triangle. And in this case, the pointy planet is Mercury. So our thoughts, our conversations, our mental patterns that are being activated in the unconscious, because Mercury's backwards, is leading us somewhere, wherever we're going. And we get to where we're going by following our perception. So in some ways, Mercury really is the guiding point. He's the narrator. He tells us to turn left or right and look both ways before you cross the street. And the blunt end is Neptune and Pluto. Neptune, our spiritual connection. Pluto, our relationship to change and transformation and the deaths and rebirths that allow us to have powerful lives because nothing stays the same. So those 2 planets are like the motor here, our spiritual connection and our willingness to dive into power and authority struggles in the shadow and gravitas. And then Mercury on the other end says communication, thoughts, and conversations this week might be helping you change the direction you're moving in. And this yod, or finger of God, or finger of fate, is a navigating pattern in astrology. So it says that, well, it's called a finger of God. What that means, or finger of fate, for those of you who don't like the G word, it says that if I make a small choice now and I raise up my sails to catch the wind of this new choice, The winds of fate will blow into my sails, taking me in new directions if I allow myself to surrender to change and spiritual guidance, Pluto and Neptune. So the first time that these two hit was July 25th and 26th. So if you go back to that sort of week in that last part of July, look for any thoughts, conversations, interactions, intuitive hits, anything that might hint to making an adjustment, moving in a new direction, to having something change that forced you to move in a new direction. That would be an inconjunct to Pluto, or maybe having a guided inspiration that says change the track you're on. That would be an inconjunct for Mercury to Neptune. Mercury was not Mercury was not retrograde then, so he was direct. It might not have knocked you on your ass. But the same geometry is coming back to us this Wednesday, Thursday. And Mercury's backwards, so it's going to be more befuddling. So I don't have anything to say to you about proactively meeting this week. I'd rather have you all just curious. Not stridently attached to what you think things should be, but more, oh, that's interesting that that obstacle happened, or that's interesting that I didn't see that asshole coming, or that's interesting that I wished for this and this is what happened. Be curious so that you can let the unconscious process that's happening guide you. But make no mistake about it, smack dab in the middle of this week are likely to be some shifts and some changes that come from these more subtle ways that we feel intuitive or inspired or changed in some way that makes us move differently. Now, those same days this week, Wednesday, Thursday, have some traffic with Mars that's incredibly unstable and capable of rendering your perceptions a little not right-sized. Mars is going to conjunct Jupiter and then square Saturn on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. Now, that's because Saturn and Jupiter are getting ready to square themselves, and I'll be talking all about that in next week's podcast episode. That doesn't quite get exact till next Monday, but it's activated by Mars this Wednesday and Thursday. So this Wednesday and Thursday, you can bet that there's the potential to feel wildly confident and optimistic about everything you're doing. Mars conjunct Jupiter. That's like a party with a stick of dynamite attached to it. But Jupiter has a shadow of overvaluing, seeing things as shiny and bright that tomorrow won't look as good, or just having a reaction to things that's not right-sized, over the top. The very next day, Mars will square Saturn. So you have to think of these as simultaneous transits, even though they hit in different 24-hour periods. Mars squaring Saturn is like the brakes on. Mars conjunct Jupiter is like the gas on. And what happens if you put the gas and the brakes on at the same time? The whole system gets a little befuddled, and there's burning smells and car crashes. So to have our planet of action and embodiment and choices that we're making not really operating smoothly because we're reactive and over the top and too excited on the one hand, but racing toward a brick wall on the other with a square to Saturn, that alone is the kind of energy that would make me tell people, just move freaking slowly, kids, because you just never know what's going to happen. And if you're happy and excited, have at it. But exercise caution so that you're not so excited that you dance a jig of joy off the cliff. So to have Mars creating so much instability on a 2-day period where Mercury is going to be in some weird, befuddled, unconscious processing choice making, just know that the middle of the week is juicy and dicey, interesting and fascinating, and be mindful and move slow. And I'll re-remind you all of how hyperbolic I am so that you don't hear everything I just said through the lens of, Chicken Little. The sky is not falling. It's just an exciting little traffic in astrology that will bring some stress, some changes, some observations, some awareness, some insight, some bumps in the road. And there's nothing else to talk about, so I'm putting a lot of emphasis on it. But again, I wouldn't call these mild days, but they aren't cataclysmic. Now, the most unstable triple transit in Mercury's cycle is the square from Mercury to Uranus. Now, Mercury and Uranus have a sort of a mental and intellectual relationship. All the personal planets have this with an outer planet. With mind, it's Mercury as thoughts, conversations, and perceptions. I call that mind, small m. And then Uranus, the great awakener, is a mental and intellectual planet as well. And we would call that higher octave of the mind, capital M. In love, it's Neptune and Venus. In action and movement, it's Mars and Pluto. So the idea that Mercury in a retrograde is going to interact with his higher octave of thought, mind, perception, and intellect, but in conflict geometry of a 90-degree square, that's unstable no matter how you slice it. And so, like all the things I was, griping about the early moments of the Mercury retrograde when he turned around and all the technical problems I had that week, any astrologer would look at a Mercury retrograde cycle that included a square to Uranus as particularly unstable in a general sort of way. But there's specificity to breakdowns or sudden shifts or explosions of thought, positive and negative, that this might have brought you in the past, and what might come up on Saturday when it hits again is the part of the triple transit notion. So back on July 21st, which was the Capricorn full moon, Mercury squared Uranus. Now that's doubly interesting. I got to send you guys back in time a little bit, because right before that full moon was the conjunction of Mars and Uranus on July 15th and 16th. So Uranus himself got like a big awakening, triggering experience by conjuncting with Mars. And if you go back to the news of that week, it was a pretty crazy week because things happened very unexpectedly. And so you can think of both Mars and Uranus as still reverberating with the energy of their conjunction in mid-July. And so because this Mercury square Uranus that I'm talking about that's returning on Saturday was part of the full moon of last month, and Mercury squared Uranus and Mars was right nearby, there's just a connection to this Saturday's repeat of a square to Uranus, which will likely generate sudden and unexpected thoughts and conversations and shifts that happen mentally and intellectually, may connect back to July 21st and give or take a bunch of days, on either side of that date. So fasten your seatbelts over the weekend. Saturday's going to have sort of, anything can happen and probably will in the neck up experience. And the full moon is brewing. So it's not only going to be interesting on Saturday because of the square from from Mercury to Uranus. We're amplifying amplifying into a peak of the lunar cycle that, hits Monday. So the weekend's translation, it's going to be an intense weekend, for sure. Now, Saturday also features a Mercury experience that makes it important and potentially revealing. So I'll start with the event itself. It's the inferior conjunction of Mercury and the Sun that hits on Saturday. 26 degrees of Leo. This is where the Sun will be that weekend. This is where then Mercury will get to that weekend. And this becomes one of the most important days of every Mercury retrograde cycle, because of the geometry of how close Mercury is to the Sun and how close we are to both of them. The Mercury's never farther than like 17 degrees on either side of the Sun, or 28 degrees. I can't remember the degree points, but it's very close always. And because of the precision of Mercury retrograde cycles, Mercury comes together with the sun by conjunction exactly at the midpoint of every Mercury retrograde. We call it the inferior conjunction because when Mercury is appearing to move backwards, that conjunction happens in front of the sun. In other words, Earth, Mercury, then sun. So you can even think of that passing in between us and the sun is akin to Mercury going below, going into underneath spaces where we can't go. Like we could go around the sun, but we couldn't go in front of the sun. I mean, I'm talking science fiction, so I'm not talking about real things. But I'm trying to give you an image of excitation that says, "Oh, I get it. Mercury is not out of bounds over." I shouldn't use out of bounds because that's an astrological term. Mercury's like out there on the other side of the sun, not connected to us, but he's in between us and the sun, meaning he's like digging down below. And I call the inferior conjunction like the aha moment. Because Mercury is backwards, he's in the unconscious, the sun is our conscious awareness. When the two come together, it's like the light of consciousness shines down into where Mercury is trekking in the below, and we get some observations, awarenesses, messages, aha moments that relate to what we're learning in a manner that we can't see quite yet. So I always tell people to pay attention, pay attention, and pay attention on the day itself, the day before and after as well. So that's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday with an emphasis on Saturday. And so you've got this unstable mental experience of Mercury squaring Uranus on Saturday, which is going to knock some of us on our ass mentally. And then I'm also going to ask you to be still and cogent enough to sort of listen for the messages, right?
Would you say this is a good week to meditate?
That's a brilliant question, Zoe. And the answer, of course, is yes, obviously, because and you want to get still enough to sort of hear the message, and yet sitting down and meditating on Saturday might be difficult to do no matter how you slice it.
Yeah.
I think, for anybody who's getting crunchy listening to all of this, because it is a lot of like moving parts, try to back away from like interpreting every little bit of the astrology and just do this. Be mindful, be curious. Mindful just says you're paying attention in a way that's amplified from casual paying attention. Right? That's it. You just need to be paying attention more. It's like if you were walking on a path that had potholes in it, you'd pay more attention to where your footfall was going so you didn't twist your ankle. Right? So that's it. I'm asking you to be mindful of everything that's going on so that you're not moving faster than the speed of thought to not miss anything. And then when I say be curious, curiosity is like a fabulous way to greet adversity. Curiosity is a great way to meet the unexpected, right? We're so quick to judge or get frightened or to screech the brakes on when something happens that we didn't plan for or that we felt like we weren't prepared for. And if we meet those surprising moments with like fear and retraction, we miss what's possible, and we get what's possible if we just say, I'm so curious about this bump in the road. Let's see where this leads or what I can learn. So be mindful, be curious. Yes, meditate all week if you can. And just understand we're working through kind of the roughest Mercury retrograde week. And then understand when we get back here next Sunday night at midnight or Monday at midnight, we'll be talking about full moon in Aquarius and Saturn and Jupiter in their square. And next week's even juicier. But meanwhile, have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week we have an email in dream from Cav. She's writing in from New York and says, "Hi, Dr. Michael and Zoe. I recently had a dream that I cannot stop thinking about, and I would love for your help. There was a small bump/wart on my right index finger near the knuckle, and it was reddish purple. I squeezed it as if it was a pimple, but a string started to squeeze out. I got scissors to cut it because it felt tight and like it was cutting off blood supply from being wrapped around the inside of my finger. The first piece I pulled out was about an inch long, folded in half, and it was completely red. After that piece came out, there was a half red, half white piece that was also about the same size, and it was straight. My finger immediately started to heal up, and almost immediately it was gone. The wound was red, but there was no blood anywhere. It was just on the string. Not sure what I did with the string at that point, but my finger was fine. Thank you so much. Cav in NYC."
I cannot stop seeing a finger with a string tied around it as an image of "don't forget this." Now, do you relate to, I'm thousands of years older than you. So this image may be from media when I was a kid, like cartoon images of, like the school teacher saying, "Johnny, tell your mother to, bake cookies for the bake sale. I'm going to tie this string around your finger so you remember that." Do you have any association with what I'm saying, Zoe, or is that just making this up?
I know what you're saying, and that's not exactly like what my generation heard.
Right. Okay, so this is actually greatly instructive on dream and dream interpretation. I have that association. I'm a almost 61-year-old man. You are a 30-something-year-old. Yeah, so I'm twice your age. So that's interesting that it's strong enough for you to be like, yeah, I kind of can see that. I've seen that image somewhere. Very powerful. We don't know how old Cav is. So I, as the beholder of the dream, have an interpretation about this that's based on my imagining that image as more universal than it might now be. And this is how my gift works, right? It's like, if that's not a universal image, then I'm just making something up and adding my interpretation. Like, I know people who say they're dream interpreters and they have intuitive gifts, and someone says a dream and they go into their intuition and they give them intuitive advice. And I am not doing that. I am approaching dreams with a universal language approach, interpreting symbols in a universal manner. It's consistent dream to dream. It's not something that shifts on the whims of my intuition. So fingers are about identifying things, right? We point with our index finger. So that's something that's interesting, that Cav is having a consideration first and foremost about like how they're guiding themselves and others, with that finger that sort of means a pointing. I have to add, I think that the thing that turns out to be a string tells me, like, if it were my dream, I would see this as a dream of things I forgot, things I wanted to remind myself of from my past that I didn't honor, like aspects of self-care or discipline for meeting life in a certain way, or like I'm finally ready to change that relationship dynamic, or let's change how I eat food so I can, change my body shape. I mean, so I'm acknowledging that I'm adding that in a way that might not be universal, But it is interesting that there's no blood. That to me says there's no actual injury. We're not talking about something that injured. The blood's on the string. So if the blood's on the string, then the wound is on the forgetting of what the string was there to remind you of. So even this idea of pulling off this cord and something coming out of it that is first like it's folded in half and completely red, that suggests to me the sort of imploded experience of retracting from the forgotten thing, and the redness of it is, okay, this was bad that I forgot that thing and I'm not attending to. Then we continue the healing and we get a sort of another layer of this, which is the half wet, half right piece, same size, straight, not folded. That means we're no longer imploded. We're opening up from the squeeze and we're losing the sense of the blood as problematic and the white returning as like, we're going to heal from this. And then again, the finger is immediately healed. The wound is on the string. So I can't get away from my interpreting this dream as the string indicates these past promises broken. And because Cav's not here, and I don't know how they're going to respond to how I'm presenting the dream back to them, I'd love for you to, once you hear this, Cav, write us back. Tell me what you think, because I want to be pure and sacred with how I hold dreams. And I recognize that there, especially as I get older, there are universal imagery meanings that make sense to me, but that might be getting outdated because, you know, I'm old and things change. But I do love this dream as an indication of something healing in how Cav identifies, you know, what she wants to indicate to others where her life is going. We tend to blame ourselves for everything.
Right.
And those turns into wounds of shame, wounds of regret, wounds of inability. And very often those wounds are sort of, you know, self-generated and false. You know, we hurt ourselves for things that aren't really true about us. So for me, that the finger's not bleeding tells me that this isn't a self-deprecating shame. Cav isn't expressing a wound of self. It's the wound of what the string represents. The string is holding the red. The string seems bloody, and the finger heals immediately. So that tells me the wound is more of regret. First of all, we do know that we're talking about things from the past. If there's a string that's coming out now, then ipso facto, a string got stuck in there some part in the future, the past, right?
Right.
Why? Again, I go with string on the finger as a reminder of something that's important. So then if the blood is on the string and the string is a reminder of something in the past that felt important that got ignored, and then you pull it out and be like, I can heal this by attending to it. I wasn't actually injured, but that there might be injury connected to something that was at some time in the past not done or not paid attention to or not gotten. So I don't usually say this, but I am going to say this to you, Cav. If you're listening and you heard this, write us an email. Tell me what you think of this idea that I've put forth to you, and we'll see if you resonate.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.